second session. And may I start by stressing that the whole topic is very crucial for our regions and cities in Europe. The COR, so from this year, so we have worked very hard with the Parliament Research Services and kind of deepening our joint efforts and putting the policy guidelines where we need this kind of foresight studies. And with what you already heard, so my background in the Parliament of Finland, so this Committee for the Future that gave a very strong, let's say, personal role on this kind of issues as well. So that was the period from the mid-90s. And one of our big issues at that time was how to make innovation a positive thing and a positive word. But not only for citizens, but especially to start with the members of the parliament, so that they would start using innovation and requesting more innovations. And on that, so then we worked that we need more dialogue, but the dialogue especially between politicians and experts. And from that to get the political decision makers to use their power in speeding up the positive change. But for that, so we need to look a bit further to the future as well. And now we are very much focusing on the same issues now when we think about the Committee of the Regions with the 350 members, mayors, regional presidents, regional ministers coming from all around Europe, and we need to, when we are facing these challenges that we are reviewing today, so how to make the changes to happen. We do not need to use the word innovation in every sentence, but we need to keep in mind that the new elements for change, so they are the crucial, and how to make that to happen. It very much means that the identifying the current and future trends accompanied by the structural revolutions as we have on this new ESPAS report, and what to do with that then. And there's no shortest of serious challenges at the horizon, so at the moment, so that's a positive thing. But then which are the most crucial ones? We know that today both short-term but especially long-term climate change is definitely that kind of issue. But then this demographic changes, aging society, how to take care of the healthcare, or how to get the people themselves, every individual, to take much more care of his or her own future with respect to health. So that is a crucial one. And then how to find new kind of systems for services. What is the role of the city in providing? Because otherwise, because the city does not anymore have an afford to do all of the kind of things that we traditionally started to do. We in the Scandinavian countries, we are facing that in concrete terms when we have developed our welfare system. So we now know clearly that we need to make structural changes. We need to renew the welfare system to keep that strongly alive. What does this mean then? Or then if we take, let's say, then to move to the migration issue. So that's in the minds of people, and that's what the citizens throughout Europe see at the moment. But that as well brings new challenges. Take again an example, so that northern Finland, we never had before the refugees coming from the north, both from Sweden, and now it's been thousands of refugees daily coming to Finland from there. And now the latest, just a few days ago, they come from the Arctic through the northern part of Russia. And certain rules say that you cannot enter by just walking across the border. So you need to have a vehicle to move. So now they had a huge number of bicycles, just for the last kilometer before the border and the first kilometer after the border, and that's it. Those 30, 40-year-old tough men who have never used a bicycle before, they needed to learn to use that to get to EU country. And now this is again stopping us to think that what kind of challenges we are, and what to do with those. So simple things, concrete things that we are facing. This really means that now today we as well, when we look through the program, discussed with some of those who participated yesterday about the impact of digitalization. Will the digital society raise our standard of living and improve our ability to deliver the services? That's what we are in the cities facing, but doing that in collaboration with the companies. I was yesterday in Helsinki with a totally different kind of setting. 15,000 young startup entrepreneurs mainly, and they're in the slush. So it was really a huge, hectic activity there, both with the young, but as well some a bit older ones, so trying to capture the essential elements of what the young people are doing. So with their pitching and the huge competitions they're going on, but as well companies, startups, but bigger traditional companies as well, trying to change their mindsets towards that, to capture the ideas. So it's something that we are facing an enormous change, and I really recommend to everyone, every of our CR member as well, to go for that kind of event, to feel what does this mean when the young generation is really bringing so much added value to this development. What kind of language they use in talking about digitalization, what kind of totally new applications are coming anyhow. So these kind of issues are the ones that we want to tackle today, and then later on I'm myself as very committed to review these outcomes of these 2 days, and then with the short small teams inside COR to see what does that mean for us. So with this in mind, so I'm very happy that we have these experts here as well, and then we'll definitely give a chance for the audience as well to make questions, whatever you have in mind. We can be very flexible. However, I now anyhow want to start with our panelists and start by going one by one, but just a very short question and short answer. So what kind of society will we live in 2030? In your own perspective, in your own field, what is the greatest hope and what is your greatest fear as well? And we'll start with the Hans Bruyninckx. He's the Executive Director of the European Environment Agency, so environment issue and especially research on that is his expert. So Hans, please start.
Okay, thank you. I think in climate and environment, we know rather well where we want to be in 2050. There is a strong vision. It's moving to a low-carbon society, away from a high-carbon society. It's going to a circular economy, away from a dig up, make use, and throw away type of society. And it's the fundamental protection of natural capital as one of the essential capitals in society, instead of further depletion and degradation. And so where I think we should be in 2030 is that we have taken credible steps and fundamental steps that move us in that direction. And this is quite revolutionary because it means that we can no longer focus on incremental efficiency gains in the systems that we know today, because those will never bring us to 2050, but that we have to question these systems and fundamentally renew them. And that means working on our energy system, serious and more rapid breakthrough of renewables. That means we have to work on a food and agricultural system that is unsustainable in its resource and energy use and its impact on human beings. It means that we will have to work on our mobility system that is unsustainable in its impacts on environment and human beings. And it will mean that we will have to think about the urban fabric primarily in Europe and how it can contribute to move to 2050.
Okay, thank you for that. And then we'll move on to Svitlana Kobzar. And you have really been active in taking part on this RAND Europe study, ESPAS processes, and you have very much done your own research with the Cambridge University linking EU to foreign and security policy. So what is your message?
Yes, so a couple of years ago, RAND has conducted a study looking at the future trends in 2030, a project led by Stein Horns, and we've identified several major trends. And when we tried to do it, we used Delphi as well. So we tried to consult experts, not just about certainties, but also levels of uncertainties, which are actually very important as well to keep in mind. And overall, we've highlighted 5 or so trends. One is that the rise of global middle class globally. And this can mean different things and different types of behavior, but also highlighted with uncertainty, because even a small fluctuation in economic growth may mean very different numbers in the middle class. For example, if we look at the high level projection of economic growth versus low projection, we have a 42% difference in the Indian middle class. So that's one trend, and also kind of the behavior that middle class will have and the relationship with the government that the middle class may have. Then the second major trend was a growing and aging population, and this is obviously happening in Europe, but also it's happening globally as countries become highly developed and middle-income countries. We see people living longer, greater absolute numbers of people over 60. And also that this potentially puts a strain on pension system, especially if fertility rates are not keeping up. And Europe is one of the regions where actually this is really strong projections taking place, unless there are other dynamics taking place. A third major trend that we've highlighted was the employment and the change in labor market. And here, especially things to keep in mind for Europe, is a young generation, vulnerable groups such as elderly, women as well, migrants, and the different situation that these groups find themselves in the new labor context. The need for STEM skills, so the science and math and technology skills, and the lack of such, especially when we look at Europe, and the competition for highly skilled migrants. That Europe may actually need to also be aware, and not just fixating on people coming in, but also thinking about to what extent it can attract highly skilled migrants and also compete with other regions such as Asia, for example. And that brings me to the fourth trend, the evolving patterns and impacts of migration. And since our report came out, migration actually has been one of the key issues, and this was also one of the issues I was focusing when we did our study. And here there's lots of different dynamics. Obviously in the recent news we've focused on forced migration, and it's natural since we see such a large number of forced migrants, and now UNHCR mentioned this year that now there are 60 million forced migrants. And if you imagine it as a country, it would be the 24th largest country in the world. So we've seen since our report came out increases in instability and wars and conflict, and this is something Europe cannot ignore, and it has really hit Europe quite closely. But in addition to that, we also have, and we've mentioned it already, urbanization happening globally, especially also in countries that are developing countries becoming middle-income countries and have a growing middle class. And urbanization is really one of the major trends, but it's, there are different drivers, including economic growth, including expansion of rural areas, including climate change. But also, despite potential positive impacts of economic development, we also see that a large share may mean that people live in slums as well, and that also creates a lot of different issues. And the last trend that I wanted to mention now is this interconnectivity, connected societies, and this can also mean a double-edged sword. On one hand, we may see more empowered individuals because people can access education, can access resources, and in some cases developing countries can leapfrog from going from not having certain technologies to really jumping through steps. We see that with mobile phones in Africa. Yep. But on the other hand, we also see still continuing digital divide within countries and between countries. And access to skills, even in Europe, when we look at the ability to use certain technologies, and this connects to other trends, to what extent people will be able to adjust to changes in technology, and also what does it mean for our society, the trust in institutions. And when we look at Europe, the different voices that exist now with vibrant discussions on the internet, and to what extent there can be a more harmonious discussion about the role of the European Union, the role of different institutions, and really to harness the opportunities that technology offers.
Okay, good. Let's come back to those and soon, but move first now to Cécile Wendling. With her, we met a bit more than a month ago, close to the Arctic Circle in northern Finland, in Oulu. There was a very extensive and challenging global forum, especially looking for the digitalization and aspects of that. So, and you have as well, you have a good experience on research. You come from AXA. You've done a lot on the risk management issues, and now I think more and more on the territorial dimension as well. Please, your short comments.
My fear is that we continue to have a silo approach to societal issues. Like we're talking about climate change, we're talking about migrants, we're talking about, I don't know, gender equality. So my fear is that we forget about the global picture. But my hope is that we manage to have what we told yesterday, like management by foresight, anticipating in a systemic way. So that my hope is that in the EU we manage to connect the dots. To do that, first of all, I'm very optimistic because I've seen with ESPAS that European Parliament and European Commission and many other European institutions, as you just said, are getting together to think about the future. What I would like to say today is I also hope that public and private sectors can come together to talk about the future. I'm in charge of foresight at AXA, an insurance company, and I meet regularly with people in charge of foresight in many other European companies. And we have lots of discussion on the societal trends, the type of solidarity, the type of trust that we want tomorrow. And I was thinking yesterday and this morning, maybe it's time we all sit together, foresight from private, foresight from public, EU actors, and figure out the world that we want. And I would like to give one concrete example of how public and private sectors can do foresight together in a, I would say, concurrent design foresight way, so in a connecting the dots way. AXA worked with the World Bank, and we thought about how can we connect climate change, migration, gender equality. Then we realized that in the past, insurance was created because people needed to sit in a boat and go far away from their country to discover new territories. And then we thought, in our society, who are the people who need to be protected to innovate? And then it was right in our face. We thought of women. Women right now, you might not know about that, but they are a large part of migrants for work. And one woman from really low middle class in Africa is covering for more than 7 to 10 people with the revenue that she's doing. So we start to look at that, and then we realized maybe by better protecting the woman, we could better protect all. And then this is how we decided to work on the future of those women in our society, and we ended up with a report called Shield for Shield. And I think this report is an example that when private actors and public actors all sit together to think about a systemic, coherent future, we can better protect our society.
Okay, very good. And definitely we can come back to those as well. But let's now then move to Franck, Debié. Yeah, you work very much here at the Parliament with Klaus Welle, the Secretary General of the Parliament, and you have been involved very much on the European system for policy analysis and strategy. So what will be this role of the Parliament as well? Please.
So just in one word, we thought we had inequalities in the society. This is not big news. They're worse than in the past because aging has played its role and is playing its role, because we have had, and it continues, the family revolution. Basically, family has been changing. In some cases, the link have been destroyed. And also because we have a labor market revolution, which means that lifelong salary employment is shrinking compared to other forms of employment. No big news here. What is documented by the report and the discussion we have around is that the risk is worse. The risk is not inequalities only. The risk is now fragmentation. Fragmentation because, in fact, growth is not the same. When you look at the big figure for the economy, this is 2, 1 or 3. When you look at the figure for the household, especially middle class or the poor, this is something like 0.4, 0.3. So basically, no growth over the last decade and no growth for the household throughout the OECD. We had just the presentation of Decoding the Future by Matt Barrow. It's the same in the US. Second, credit. People say, wonderful interest rate. This is the time of cheap credit. No, this is the time when it comes to many households, middle class, for difficult credit. Credit crunch, difficulty to gain credit. Very difficult for entrepreneurs to have access to credit. Very difficult for young people to have access to credit. Very difficult after the age of 60 to have access to credit. So credit market is not one. You have the official and then you have the reality. Labor market, this was a big element of the study, is now 2 labor markets. In Germany and France, we have full employment. This is 5% unemployment only for the qualified. But for the non-qualified, the situation is completely different and not likely to improve soon, maybe even getting worse. When you look at housing market, you have very speculative housing market in the cities, and you have, in many other places, collapsing housing market, which destroys the assets of those being there. So you have, in many places, a case where we could say that we have 2 economies. In many places, we have the formal economy, we know with its difficulty, well documented, sometimes still a social market economy, but we have on the side of this economy another economy, an informal economy that is, of course, less documented, less regulated. If the European institutions just work on the first one, fixing what they can on the formal market economy, trying to make it more inclusive, more social, we may miss the point.
Yep. Okay, very good. And let's now go a bit the kind of second round and focus on a few of the key things so that everyone has had and has on his or her speciality. Let's start with Hans now, that the environment issue. We all know that the Paris COP21 negotiations are going on. So what would you say that we need from there? And someone maybe remember that President Obama, when he stated that this is the first generation to feel the effects of climate change. But as he continued, this might be the last that can do anything about it. So can we wait or not?
Well, I think it's clear that there is a sense of urgency that is absolutely needed based on science. Because if you want to stay below the 2 degrees average, and for Europe that means higher temperature increases on average, and then even higher in some parts of Europe, we know that you are dealing with a carbon budget, yeah? A sort of ceiling on carbon, which means that we will have to act. And globally, we understand from science that we should peak around 2020, 2025 in carbon emissions to stay below those 2 degrees, which means that there is a real sense of urgency. And I think the shift now towards Paris, the breakthrough, is that under Kyoto we had about 30 countries that are conducting climate policies in a serious way, the EU being the most serious. And now we move to nearly everybody and their dog that is going to do climate policies. And I think that is the major breakthrough. What is the danger is that we are not there. With the pledges that are made today, we will be around 3 degrees, which is not enough. What makes me more of an optimist today than probably 5 or 10 years ago is that I see cracks and shifts in a revolutionary way, as says the title of today, in some of the core systems that are driving this climate issue. If you look at the energy system, last year was the first year on the planet that we installed more renewable energy than traditional energy. We see a huge and new link with the financial system, the divestment movement. Who would have thought 5 years ago that this would be front page news, right? We are seeing a more rapid breakthrough of renewables than before. We know from the pledges that are made that major economies on this planet, in order to stick to those pledges, will need to invest much more rapidly than we thought just a couple of years ago in renewables. I'm thinking of India, of China, of Brazil, of other places on the planet. So what we need is a clear vision and a commitment. We need a credible agreement, which means that we will be able to follow it up, monitor, verify what is happening. So that is the binding nature of it. And I think we also need to understand that the solidarity on this planet, when we speak about climate change, is absolutely crucial. And I would like to warn a bit there, the $100 billion that we need to get together by 2020 every year to support developing countries in this is actually, I would call, the oil in the machinery. Yeah? It's an important aspect, but if you compare this to the trillions and trillions and trillions that are invested in the economy every year, this is actually a drop in the bucket. It's an important drop. A drop of oil can be the most important drop that you have in your machine, otherwise it breaks down. But it's the drop. Yeah? It will be about investing in the key systems that we have and that are driving climate change in a future-oriented way. Let the low-carbon future shape what it is we are doing, and let's not just focus on predict how with costs and benefits we can make the little steps. So the sort of visionary imagination and the commitment that is embedded in moving to a totally different type of system of production and consumption, I think is something that we should take away from Paris. And for Europe, this opens up enormous opportunities, because we are world leading when it comes to the governance of that. We are world leading when it comes to the science and technology of that. There is a serious analysis done based on Commission studies that shows that this is exactly where we are more competitive than North America and then Asia. So we should embrace these sort of boundary conditions and build the economy of the 21st century. And to use this type of technology and economic thing, yes, we're small on the planet, but let's try to be the Silicon Valley of the economy of the 21st century, yeah? And not put on the handbrake and think that we will survive by protecting systems and industries and technologies that have no future if we accept the 2-degree world.
Fine. So we need to speed up and use the knowledge that we have. But if we link that, Svitlana, with your background with Cambridge and the really excellent research community there, so what does that bring to this issue, especially now when we think about our European neighboring regions, both in the east? With the Committee of the Regions, we have our collaboration called CORLEAP with the 6 countries next to Europe and across the eastern border. And then we have the Mediterranean issue. We have a lot of concrete activities on the field of how to develop the governance, how to develop there the decentralized system. But when you link this to your experience, how can we get more out of the best knowledge that we know that we have in Europe?
I think it's a really important issue, actually, because in many cases Europe is very much fixated on what's happening inside, but at times a lot of the things happening outside that have a direct impact on the inside. And so I think the governance model, being able to analyze what is happening in the neighborhood, but also beyond, is one of the critical steps. And I remember even 2 years back when we argued about the early warning system, about realizing the context within these countries, that was quite important. Now we live in a reality where things happening very quickly. So I think the first step is analysis and really trying to understand the dynamics. And second, I think that the tools that are being developed for Europe can be very much used and benefited in the countries besides Europe and the neighboring countries. And I think the fact that Europe can be leading in certain areas is a great example. I think environment, energy, if we look at the eastern neighborhood, is one of the critical concerns. And I was just in Ukraine, where the issues of renewable energy and energy security is one of the top issues. Also, when we look at the southern neighborhood, the issue of governance and thinking about the same issues are debated within Europe, such as employment for youth, right? Those who are NEET sort of generation, not in employment, education, or training. This is a huge issue for Europe, especially now with austerity measures and the difficulty that it creates for these vulnerable groups to secure employment. But when we look at the South and the demographic, the world demographics, we see that even though developed countries are aging, we have a youth bulge in certain regions where we have a declining child mortality, but at the same time lots of young people, and the labor demand is not really meeting those needs of the young people, and that creates also pressures from them to potentially seek opportunities elsewhere. So the thinking behind how to create employment, how to foster training, and how to help people adjust to different skills that are needed by laborers is something that should be happening inside Europe and outside of Europe. And I think that genuinely working through the questions of governance now and the questions of strengthening the states and civil society, and really think through the complex relationship that society actually creates. And that's why I really enjoyed actually being on a panel and working on a project on looking at society, because I remember analyzing the Soviet Union and collapse of the Soviet Union, and in many cases, when you fixate only on foreign policy, sometimes without looking at the different societal dimensions, you may miss important points, such as, when you look at the demographic or the changing dynamics of the middle class and the changing dynamics of demands are created and employment and so on. All of these translates into ultimate policies.
Good, thank you. But now let's move on to Cecilia. And because you said now in your opening, so that we need to remember the global picture. We need to see that. Take 2 examples. So we have these millions of refugees just close to Europe, waiting to get here. They don't have the ongoing learning processes go. They don't spend their time on really improving their skills, and so they are waiting, kind of miracle or dreaming. But then at the same time, I was last week in China. So there, Shanghai, Hangzhou area, and so on. Hangzhou, 10 million people at the moment, and when I explained that the fastest growing city in Finland is my Espoo, the western part of Helsinki, where our annual growth is close to 5,000 new inhabitants. They said, yes, but we have 500,000. So 500,000 inhabitants, mainly young people who come to work. Their unemployment rate is below 2%, so practically they are shortest of labor force. And the young people especially come for the different high-tech activities, research and development. And they are waiting to collaborate with Europe, and so maybe take over, so on, or anyhow start really creating something. And this kind of change what's been going on there. Now the young generation is really international compared to 10 or 25 years ago when I was first time in China. So this change is so fast. So back your global picture. So what is your advice? What do we need to do now?
Yeah.
Collaborate more, open more, or just try to close?
No, I think we definitely live in a very open world, and that will. I don't think that clothing is a solution. I would like to talk about those young generation that you're mentioning, those very young migrants, and I also want to talk a little bit about the elderly, because in your report, I really like the part that you had on the aging population, and I think this is a two big question that we have. So we'll start with those very young generation. They're at the border, they have nothing. Most of the time they don't have water or proper shoes, but they all have a mobile phone, for instance.
Yeah.
So we are thinking at AXA about micro-insurance. So how can we protect them just by a mobile phone? So we are thinking that if when you buy a SIM card, in your SIM card you can have some sort of protection for you and your family, that would be a good sign of technology helping society. So we are working on those customers of tomorrow, which are very poor, but will need to be micro-insured, because if we insure them, we insure the whole family behind. That's what we do for them, and we have developed a new sectors and a new entity really looking at them. And we are working hard to know how can we just, with a one mobile phone, help them. And we're not the only one to do this. You might have heard of a Millennia project, and they have specific mobile phone in Africa for a young pregnant woman. And this mobile phone, they can call for help, and they can receive tips for their own prevention. So what I want to say is those new generation, even the poorest, because they have a smartphone, there is a new way to protect them. Something I want to say about the elderly generation. There are three things that they need, as said by researchers: enough money, enough social contact, and enough dreams, project, and autonomy. So we're also thinking about this group of people. And for enough money, we are starting to think about reimbursing not only a normal consultation, but also a teleconsultation. So if you just sit in front of your computer and ask your medical doctor for help, that too should be reimbursed, so that they do not have money problem and they can be encouraged to ask questions about their health. Most of them also have breathing disorder, breathing problems, and they wait till the worst moment to go to the hospital. And this costs them quite a lot, because they have to call an ambulance or a taxi, and they arrive and there is a stress. So we are thinking about working with AXA assistants in Portugal on specific way to monitor their breathing issues and tell them in advance, you're having a breathing issue now. So just sit down, maybe have a glass of water, and then we prevent the crisis to avoid that at the end they find in a hospital with a very complex situation. So that's for the money. Then what can we do about the contact with thought? And this is where we developed a project in Japan. It's called Are You OK? Because we notice all the young generation in Japan, they have a smartphone, but maybe if the grandmother or the grandfather had a smartphone too, that will enhance the social contact they have inside the family. And finally, enough project, dreams, autonomy. And I would like to connect with the previous panel on robotics. I made a study on the future of robotics for those elderly people. And I thought, oh, they will want a human, you know, they will want human contact. But some of them told me, I cannot ask for the 7 times a glass of water to a human. He will think, you know, I'm not nice to him and that I'm taking advantage of the situation. But a robot, I can ask 7, 10 times. A robot will never feel, you know, annoyed. So actually, I want my autonomy, and I want to ask for 10 times a glass of water if I want. Yep. So I would prefer a robot. So what the link, I think, between those two, those younger generation and the older generation, that we can connect the two with the digitalization, and we can help them build kind of new social contacts and new types of interaction, which are based on autonomy, innovation, rather than dependency. It's based on proactive prevention, rather than crisis. And this is where we think we could contribute.
Good, then I'll take part of that back when we discuss at the COR. We are having at the beginning of the Slovak presidency, the big summit of cities and regions in Bratislava, 7th and 8th of July. And that is connectivity, but we are starting really concrete things with the energy and transportation, traffic, smart traffic, but really looking strongly, as your message is, the people, what is happening there through the help of everyone is in principle through the smartphones, they are connected. And then that links to what Svitlana was saying about the importance of interconnectivity before. Next, Franck, as you've been very, let's say, instrumental in a leading role in the work of ESPAS. And so think about a bit about the how to implement the results. And due to these questions, so there was as well this short the report of knowledge, the knowledge future by the Commission, and there is the forward by the Commissioner Carlos Moedas, and his first statement is there that in Europe we need to create the necessary conditions to capitalize on the results of research and innovation. And when I think about that, taking that back to 15 years ago when we drafted at the Parliament of Finland, so the success factors for Finland. So we had there implementing lifelong learning, so good education learning policy. Second point was invest more in research and development. And then we had there the operating as an information society, digitalization laboratory in Europe. So we've succeeded in all of those, but we forgot that we should have implemented the results in business life. So we've not been good enough on that. That's one of the main reasons so that we are in a complicated financial situation. So jobs are not invented. So that's the young people have taken that in their own hands with this Slush and the other startup activities. Total change from the big companies, but as well definitely big companies play a crucial role there, but it's partnerships, strategic alliances. But with the ESPAS, so what to do with the implementation?
On implementation, the chairman Rubik said a very simple sentence in the introduction, like he likes, saying individual will surprise us. And this is the core message of the whole ESPAS report. It's the empowerment of the individual. Solutions are not going to come from a central place or from thinking at a central place. So what is very likely in line with what we have been discussing in the ESPAS report is an ecosystem that is helping social innovation, individual volunteering, innovation not only in the field of business, but also innovation that helps people. It sounds a little bit utopian, but this is what is happening, in fact. Society is not waiting for the institution or for kind of invisible hand to fix the problem. People, companies, NGOs are doing the work, and they do it more and more together. But what is missing compared to other continents, especially the US, in order to make this ecosystem as profitable, fruitful as we have in other places, is labor mobility. Yeah. We stay where we are born. We had this discussion with your members in the Committee of the Region a few weeks when, with James Ellis, we presented the key finding of the ESPAS report, and we discussed this map done by the one of the research service of the Commission about the level of enroutment in the city. In many places, in many cities, including very big cities, 95% of the population has been born there or close by. We are not a continent on the move, despite the very European promise. So if we want to have a dynamic ecosystem for entrepreneurs, public-private partnership, innovation, where the good practice at one end can help people at the other end of the continent, we have to work on mobility and connectivity. And those are two massive conclusions of the ESPAS report. And here we're very far from the final objective.
Let's finish this with one question for our panelists. So, using the opportunity that the Committee of the Regions, so we really have the cities and regions there, so and strongly committed on this collaboration. But what is your point. So what could be the new thing? Think about the ESPAS work and the Foresight issue in general. What would you recommend us to consider to do in addition to what we are doing in general? So Franck?
Encourage people to move.
Yeah.
People have to learn to move here. And the region can empower them to move. Training, language skills, connectivity. Maybe mobility is not always physical mobility. Maybe it's the potential for connectivity is even bigger. But people have to learn to move on the continent. This is their home.
Yep. Hans?
I think we should look at Europe's cities as fantastic laboratories of innovation of the type that we need to move to this low-carbon circular economy with high natural capital and environmental protection. European cities have it in them to do it. It's happening today. They are systems also that integrate groups and institutions and science institutions. So creative labs and then setting up networks where actual learning between these living labs can take place in a much more efficient way.
Good. Svitlana?
I agree with the points actually mentioned. I would also add that within cities there may be different creative solutions to a variety of social issues, including, for example, when we discuss in addition to environment, but also migrant integration. A lot of times we fixate on one issue as if it's a silo, as was mentioned in the beginning, but issues linked to migrant integration may be linked to other vulnerable groups. It may be linked to overall education, it may be linked to finding a way for people in general to have skills. But that sort of work can be done on a local level because this is where the knowledge of the needs and the knowledge of the population is closest. I think I completely agree on the issue of mobility. I would also extend it beyond Europe. When we look at my area of research has been the Eastern Partnership and Ukraine in particular. For example, 85% of people in Crimea have never left anywhere before. 75% of people in southeastern Ukraine have never traveled anywhere before. So you can tell all sorts of stories about Europe to regions who've never been to Europe or to even within their own countries. So I think that the solutions that Europe is thinking for itself can also be discussed, and I think you're doing it already, I know, with the partner countries as well. And lastly, I think, and this is the point which I started with, is thinking about vulnerable groups, because a lot of times the discussion on future possibilities is very exciting when you're thinking about all sorts of robots and opportunities that may be there, and your mind is just kind of dancing with these prospects that you may have in the future. But this is about the people who may not be actually having a chance to take advantage of it, and what will happen to the vulnerable groups, and how to take them on board with these opportunities is something that will be especially prevalent for Europe, but also globally.
Cecilia?
So I have one recommendation for ESPAS is to create a group with the head of foresight of regions, the head of foresight of cities, and head of foresight of big EU companies, and then work together on a public-private, coherent, systemic view of the future. I really believe that it will make a big difference in the work to come and the future of Europe.
Okay, great. So I got a lot of good recommendations for us as well to consider to continue both with ESPAS and the Parliament's research services and other EU institutions. So increase this concrete collaboration. Thank you very much for this debate, and let's move on to the coffee break.